thanks a lot for talking to me, man, about Possessor. I saw it at Sundance back in January, and it's a movie that I've been praising ever since. I really thought it was great.
Thank you.
Talk to me about it's an incredible head trip. So I guess what I want to know is, where did this idea come from? First of all,
Right. So, I mean, the idea came from, in a sense, a kind of trivial personal place.
hmm
I was going through a bit of a strange period where a lot of things were in flux, and I was, in a sense, having trouble seeing myself in my own life. I was waking up in the morning, feeling like I was sitting up into someone else's life and having to construct a character who could operate in that context. So I initially wanted to make a film about someone who may or may not be an imposter in their own life, as a way of talking about how we build characters and narrative in order to function as human beings. So the seed of it was really in those kinds of dramatic scenes, actually, and then the thriller sci-fi plot kind of built out from that.
that's kind of one of the things I was going to ask you about, because it is almost like two separate movies. There's the sort of espionage aspects of it, but then there's her domestic part. And I was going to ask what part kind of built around the other, like what's like how did that work out for you? Like you just said that the domestic stuff was kind of central, but how did that work out really?
I mean, from a writing perspective, kind of organically. Again, the ideas came from this personal feeling of, I guess, disconnecting from my own identity. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people do experience at times. And that's interesting to me because it suggests there's a way that we build characters and stories, not just for other people, but also for ourselves. The characters that we keep for ourselves, our own self-image and our own personal narratives. All of that stuff was really fascinating. But it's also a bit hard to do that in a film, for one thing. It would be much easier in a book, say, where you could spend 100 pages on interior dialogue
Yeah.
and explore it that way. And then also, I like pulpy films as well. I like that sort of fun stuff. And I like the pairing of the kind of nerdy philosophy side with something more visceral and entertaining.
One of the things because I'm a big spy movie fan. So when I was watching this and I was thinking, one of the things that I love about those movies is this idea that you spend so much time undercover that you kind of lose yourself. And that was a theme that I kept thinking about over and over again while I was watching the movie. It's like you've taken this idea and kind of horrored it up a little bit.
For sure. And I like those movies too. I like that dramatic version of it. It's just my head always goes to more of like a sci-fi horror place. And so this seemed like an enjoyable way to explore it. That was, as you say, taking that kind of structure, but then injecting this other aspect to it.
Do you see this as, what kind of movie do you see this as? Like, would you see it as a horror or a comedy? I think in their performances, Chris kind of playing like a little bit like Andrea, and Andrea kind of playing a little bit like Chris. It is kind of funny in a way. How do you see the film? Like, how do you perceive it when you think about it?
I'm glad that you see it as funny, because I also see it as funny. I see all my films as being, on a certain level, comedies, and not everybody really gets that. Interestingly, horror fans and genre fans, I feel like, are able to see the humor in them more for some reason. Maybe it's just because they're used to that pairing of humor with violent images or explicit images. That's normal for horror fans, and maybe other people can't see it as clearly. I remember telling somebody I thought Antiviral, my first film, was a romantic comedy, and this journalist got very mad at me and said, "It's not funny, it's not funny." And just started yelling, "It's not funny," at me. So that sometimes happens. But I think it, in my mind, it is also a horror film, not just because of the imagery, but because it deals with this kind of dread and anxiety and losing yourself. Depending on who you talk to, horror can be defined in different ways. I tend to take a sort of broad definition of it, because when you look at the history of horror, it's such a varied and rich history. I can't define it narrowly as just the Conjuring universe, but a lot of people today are exposed mainly to those films and have a particular view on horror. In the end, it sort of doesn't matter, because films are what they are, and these are sort of useful for being able to talk about them in a certain way, and they're certainly useful in terms of marketing, but ultimately I think that kind of categorization ends up being a bit limited. And
I'm glad you mentioned the antiviral movie that I remember quite well from Sundance as well. I, you know, it's been a bit of a gap between both films, and I guess I'm curious, were you developing this around the same time, or was this something that you needed that time, that kind of break in between, in order to get to this kind of movie, which I think shows tremendous growth as a filmmaker?
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. To be honest, it just took that long to get it made. Antiviral, for one thing, was my first film. I didn't have a film career back then, so I didn't have other things in development. I was just starting out, and I put all of my energy for 7 years, really 7 or 8 years, into just getting Antiviral made and getting to the point where I could have a feature film. After that, I had to start from scratch to a certain degree. So I had to come up with a new idea and write it and develop it, and then indie films are just sometimes difficult to get financed, and that really slowed it down.
Well, this has been fantastic, Brandon. I really appreciate you taking a few minutes to talk Possessor with me. Good luck with the film, man. I'm looking forward to seeing the responses from a bigger group of people. And thanks a lot, man.
Well, thank you. Nice talking to you. Thanks.
Thanks.